Hello and welcome to this debate between the candidates for the office of Secretary of State. On my left, we have David D'Arcangelo, who is a Republican candidate, and on my right, Danny Factor, candidate for the Green Rainbow Party. Secretary Galvin declined to engage in the debate. To begin with, just to quickly go over the format of the debate. This is a 1 hour recorded live. There will be no edits once we begin. There was no pre-screening of the questions that will be asked, and I will be picking them at random from this bowl. The candidates in a coin flip have decided who is going to be going first with their opening statements. There will be a 1-minute opening statement first from Mr. D'Arcangelo, and then followed by a 1-minute opening statement from Mr. Factor. And then we will proceed into a series of 10 questions chosen, as I've already mentioned. And at the conclusion of those questions that I'll be asking, the candidates will have an opportunity to ask each other 2 questions each. In each case, answers to the question will be given 2 minutes, and then there will be 1 minute for a rebuttal. At the conclusion of all of that, the candidates will give their closing statements, and we will be done. So without further ado, I just want to make clear that the candidates will be answering those questions, that series of questions from me, in round-robin fashion. So I'll be alternating back and forth between each one. So now, without further ado, we will move to Mr. D'Arcangelo for his opening statement.
Thank you very much. It's David D'Arcangelo. I'm running for Secretary of the Commonwealth here in 2014. I'm asking for your vote this November because I want to restore our office of Secretary of State to what it should be. And that's an office that takes care of people's documents and that makes your documents open. That's an office that's modern, not antiquated. I'm running against Bill Galvin. He's been there for 20 years as your Secretary of State. 42 years he's been working in the State House as an elected official. It's time for change. I ask you to take a look at my website, davin2014.com, where you can see my detailed 11-point reform agenda, where I lay out all the positive ideas for the Secretary of State's office that is based on transparency and modernization. That's what I want to do as your next Secretary of State. I thank Arlington Community Media, Danny, and everybody else here for watching today this important debate for Secretary of the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Factor.
Hello, I'm Danny Factor. I'm the Green Rainbow Party candidate for Secretary of State. And the reason that I'm running for Secretary of State is that the Secretary of State should be the person that should be stopping corporate greed. The Secretary is the head of the Corporations Division. He should be stopping corporate greed dead in its tracks. Now, the Secretary also has another important responsibility. He is the head of the Elections Division. He should be making sure that we have free and fair elections and that they are open. That means that people are able to run regardless of their belief, regardless of their creed, regardless of their color. We need to have elections that are free and fair. I'm the Green Rainbow Party candidate. My website is electfactor.org, electfactor.org.
Thanks very much. And we will move right into the questions now. And the first question that I have chosen will go to you, Mr. Factor, initially. Do you think the Secretary of State's office should provide more technical assistance and education to local units of government to help strengthen adherence to public records law, increase transparency, and promote good government? If so, what steps would you take? If not, why not?
Absolutely, yes. And we should be supplying this not only to local government, but to the people themselves. After all, we are, the Secretary is the chief public information officer of the state. And a lot of the problems that we're having, a lot of the reason that the people feel that the system is fixed right now, that it's not working for them, is that they don't have the correct information. Take health care, for example. I support a single-payer health care plan that would provide every single person decent, affordable health care. That's also a plan that will save the Commonwealth billions of dollars a year. So it's a win-win situation. So it's just an example of the type of information that, whether it be local governments, whether it be people, that we need to be able to make good decisions. You mentioned transparency. Also, I'm a Green Rainbow Party candidate. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I believe in good government and the people owning their government and having the right to know. That's not happening right now, so we do need to have far more transparency. Public records should be easier to get, not only local governments, but the public themselves. There's no reason in this day of technology that we shouldn't be able to have any public record that we want within 7 days of creation available online. So I pledge to be a secretary that's not from one of the big two parties, the Democrats or the Republicans. I pledge to be a secretary for the people.
Thanks very much. Mr. D'Arcangelo, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Yes, so I believe that right now the current secretary has put all these unfunded mandates on our local city and town clerks, and I'm sensitive to that because I'm a Malden City Councilor at large, two-time elected Malden City Councilor at large. So our cities and towns are being asked to do more with less. Under my plan of modernization and transparency, we would use the force multiplier of technology to get with electronic voting. That would make it much easier on our local city and town clerks and registrars of voters in the elections process. So much of what they have to do now is the antiquated old processes that they're saddled with by the Secretary of State through these unfunded mandates, like checking people manually off in the voter's book. And when it comes time for nomination papers, they have to physically check that. There are modern ways to do that we can use technology as a force multiplier to make better. So I'm very much in favor of transparency and modernization. Those are the two planks of my platform.
Thanks very much. Next question goes to you initially, Mr. D'Arcangelo, and it is, if you could ask the incumbent one question, what would it be and why?
I would ask him one simple question. For 180 days, I've been waiting for my public records request to be answered. And it is, Mr. Secretary, why did you have to appear in all those public service announcements where you spent millions of dollars on taxpayer money essentially promoting yourself? Which, by the way, don't just believe me. I'm not just saying that. Look at the Associated Press article that quotes Democrat operative Dan Payne for saying as much. He shamelessly spent taxpayer money to promote himself. That's outrageous. Instead of using those millions of dollars on that, I would have used millions of dollars on a voter drive that would have enrolled more voters. I would have used millions of dollars streamlining our ballot process to make it easier for people to vote. Let's go with electronic voting. We're the technological center of the world here with institutions like Harvard and MIT and Raytheon and a very educated electorate. So I really believe it's time for electronic voting. He's had 20 years, he hasn't gotten it done. So I'd ask him, why did you spend all that money and all those resources on self-promotional stuff when you could have been putting it into voter education programs, modernization, helping make our documents more transparent? Again, he's been on the front page of the Boston Globe twice in the past 2 months. Bad stories about how he's been hiding public records and he's choosing to spend money through certain firms that he's then using on his campaign. That's outrageous. It's not right. He's been there 42 years. It's time for a change. So I would just say, hey, Mr. Secretary, why did you have to spend millions of dollars on yourself? And why instead didn't you spend it on the people who deserve it, the taxpayers of this great Commonwealth? Pretty simple question. And for 180 days, my public request has been there. He hasn't answered. He's had 20 years and he just has not gotten it done. It's time for a change.
Thanks very much. Mr. Factor.
If I would ask the Secretary one question, is that since you're the chief person in charge of elections, why haven't you been paying attention to the fact that our elections in Massachusetts are not fair? Part A of the question would be to remind him that 10 years ago, Secretary Galvin was sitting in office while we finally, the people, by referendum, passed a clean elections bill. That bill was overruled by our legislature in a voice vote, and Secretary Galvin did not say one peep about the people's vote being usurped. That would have radically changed our election system to make it fairer, to allow more voices in, and that did not happen. So I would ask Secretary Galvin why. Why didn't you speak out on behalf of the people?
Thanks. Question number 3 goes to you, Mr. Factor, and it is, interestingly enough, right after question number 2, the incumbent, William Galvin, assumed office on January 1st, 1995, more than 19 years ago. Why do you think that Mr. Galvin keeps getting reelected? And why do you think it's time for a change?
Well, he keeps getting reelected for one thing, because we have a problem of money in politics. We shouldn't have people getting elected because of who their friends are or as far as how much money they have in politics, but that's the situation that is right now, and it becomes self-perpetuating. So we have to radically change the way that we manage money in elections. One of the things that a secretary or any officer who is supposed to be regulating, whether it be corporations or securities, you can't be taking money from the very people that you're going to be regulating. And when you do that, you enable yourself to get elected and elected again. And we've seen, what happens. Secretary Galvin being in office in 20 years is really the worst case scenario. It really shows us what happens in a stale political system that doesn't have an engine in it for change. I believe that the Green Rainbow Party is that engine. We're not the Democrats, we're not the Republicans. We stand for transparency. We stand for getting the money out of politics. We even have internal rules in our party that disallow us from taking money from lobbyists for-profit corporations. We even don't allow contributions to our candidates from officers of those very corporations. Because one of the ways, James, that Senator Galvin is able, to amass, this amount of money, $2 million in his campaign chest, is to get money from lawyers, from presidents, from vice presidents of corporations under the guise that they're not corporate contributions. We know better.
Thank you. Your turn.
James, great question, and Danny touched on a piece of it. I take a little bit of a different view. I do think money has something to do with it, because what happens is he gets in there and he uses the power of his office, the power of incumbency, to go out and raise money from all the usual suspects and all the different offices that interact with the Secretary of State's office. If I'm elected Secretary of State, I'll pledge to not take that money, number one. Number two, I guess the other answer of it is a civics question. I have people campaigning. Been campaigning since January, and people still come up to me and say, hey, you're running against John Kerry. Well, if John Kerry isn't even the United States Secretary of State anymore. So, that's part of it too, is running a public education campaign. And I look inward and say, you know what, I need to do a better job of getting my message out. And it's a challenge. You need the money to be able to get on broadcast television. That's it. So that's really why he's been able to keep his office, because he's been able to amass a large campaign war chest, just keep spending, and it becomes very difficult to challenge that.
Thanks. Moving on to question 4. Mr. D'Arcangelo, please give us one example of an issue that you and your opponents agree on, and 2 examples of issues on which you differ, and why your own positions would represent the best interests of the Commonwealth.
Sure. I think a position where we probably all agree is on the historic tax credit, for an example. I believe in the historic tax credit program. I think it's a good program. One of the places where I'll disagree, though, is I don't think the Secretary has done a good job of allocating all the tax credits. There's $5 million allocated to the program every year, and there's been several years where he hasn't used all the tax credits and actually sent them back. That, to me, is not appropriate, because when you look at MedTech, for example, down on the South Coast, there was an opportunity to add 600 jobs to the Fall River area. But what happened? He sent the money back. All he needed was one swipe of his pen to declare an old mill building a historic site, and they would have brought 600 jobs into that community. That would have made a major difference in that community. But what did he do? Because of political reasons, he sent that money back. As a result, the community missed out on 600 jobs. So while I agree on the tax credit program, I disagree with the way he was implementing it. And I guess the number one disagreement I have is, again, if you look at the front page articles on the Boston Globe, they've whacked Galvin and they've said, you've done an awful job in terms of public records, transparency. He's done an awful job when it comes to bidding out these contracts that have been no bid contracts. And then he's used the people on his campaign. And again, when it comes to transparency, he's gotten the grade of F from the National Freedom of Information Coalition when it comes to transparency in government. They're a nonpartisan watchdog group that ranks all the states. We're one of the worst states in terms of transparency. That's outrageous. He's had 20 years. He could have made changes. But instead, what happened? When I had my press conference up on the State House step and John Keller stuck the microphone in his face, he said, oh, well, I've changed the law as recently as 5 years ago. 5 years ago? Really? That's the best you got? It's time for a change. He's been there 42 years. He's been secretary for 20. We need new blood in there, new ideas. That's what I represent. New ideas versus the old guard.
Thank you. Mr. Factor, 1 minute.
Yeah. I think where I can agree with on Secretary Galvin is I think both of us would be committed to making the Secretary's office as good as possible. I think that I'm impressed that Secretary Galvin has not sought higher office, that he's trying to, in his mind, make the Secretary's office something that works. The problem is that I think, he doesn't run an office. When you run the corporations division, you don't run an office that just caters to corporate needs alone. You have to look at the wider picture. I'll give you an example. We have a climate crisis, for example. He needs to be speaking out for people's futures. And that means also not always taking the side of corporations, but speaking out against issues of public safety. And that's not something that he seems to be interested in. He needs to do a better job at that.
Thank you very much. And to you, Mr. Factor, goes question number 5. What do you think are the most critical functions of the Massachusetts Secretary of State's office?
Well, I think that when you look at the elections division, for example, because everything really flows from that. If we don't have free and fair elections, then we don't have policy that represents average people. Now, I'm going to say something that a lot of people don't know, though it was reported in the Boston Globe. If you look at our state house elections, our elections for your state rep or your state senator, 50 to 60% of those elections are uncontested. That means that in many parts of the state, we really don't have what we'd like to call elections. We really don't have democracy. And a secretary should be outraged about this. He should be saying that we have a crisis in democracy. Instead, he's very happy that we have these uncontested elections where only Democrats run because it suits himself as well. It's why he's one of the reasons that he's been allowed to stay in office for 20 years. He tends to rate his office on the number of voters that are voting. Well, sure, population is increasing, so we have more voters. How about rating yourself about the number of contested races, the number of parties, the number of alternate views that you have being presented to people? Isn't that really democracy? So that's where the secretary needs to be focusing on. And as secretary, I will pledge to reduce the number of uncontested elections from more than 50% now to less than 5%, because we need to have democracy in Massachusetts. And right now, we're bordering on not having it at all.
Thank you. Mr. D'Arcangelo.
If anybody watching has anybody who they know in the military, then Bill Galvin has failed them. He was cited by the Department of Justice for failing to report military ballots. That is outrageous. Our brave servicemen and women are serving overseas for us. They're risking their lives for our freedom so that we can vote, and we're not counting their votes and reporting their votes appropriately. That's outrageous. That will change under me. And again, look it up. Don't believe me. Go on the web. You can find the Department of Justice press release, or go to my website, Dave in 2014. You can find it there. So in terms of elections, we need to be doing much more. We need to go with electronic voting. That's my positive reform, part of my positive reform agenda, to open up our elections and make it so more people can participate. I really believe that the Secretary has misallocated all this money he's used to promote himself through these self-promotional PSAs, That should have been put into better public education to get more people involved in the process.
Okay. And moving on to question 6. This is a bit of a long one, so just give me a minute. Okay. The state legislature passed an elections bill earlier this year modernizing elections in Massachusetts. Would you support Election Day registration for the Commonwealth? And is there anything else you think should be done to enhance citizen participation and improve our elections in Massachusetts?
Absolutely. This is right in my wheelhouse, and I can speak to this with credibility because I've served as an election officer for the city of Boston, as an inspector, a clerk, and a warden during a presidential election. So I know firsthand how voters engage at the ballot box and why they get disenfranchised and frustrated with the old, antiquated forms that when you ask them to fill out, they just usually end up walking out the door. My 11-point plan deals with many of this. I want to have random ballot order. That won't cost any money. That's a one-line bill that we can simply change. I want to take the I away from incumbent and the incumbency status off the ballot. They already have the power of incumbency. Why do they need that advantage too? Again, I want to go with electronic voting to make it easier for people to vote. Think about it. Right now, when you want to vote, you have to go down to your local precinct to vote. There's 2,125 precincts across the state. Under my plan, you'd be able to go into any precinct to vote. So you could easily vote whether you're at work or at school or anywhere else. That would help drive participation up. In direct answer to your question, I am in favor of same-day registration, and my electronic voting would account for that. However, the current system we have simply cannot handle it. So while I'm in favor of it, it's only under if we implement a new system, because our current system, we're already placing more unfunded mandates on our local cities and towns and our local clerks and boards of registrars of voters. The current system simply cannot handle same-day registration. So again, under my plan, it could with electronic voting. Another thing I want to do, move the date of the primary election back. That would help with same-day registration as well. So again, people can go to davin2014.com, find out my detailed 11-point reform agenda that deals with many of these issues that can be solved. As is the case with so much of this, the solution isn't the challenge. The challenge is having the political will to implement it. I have that. The Secretary's had 20 years. He hasn't gotten it done.
Thank you. Mr. Factor, 1 minute.
You know, you talk to the average person on the street, and I'm sure Dave has also, and they're sick and tired. They're sick and tired of the election system. They're sick and tired of politics in general. And the question is, how can we engage people to make them feel like they are part of a community? It's not surprising that more than 50% of the voters in Massachusetts are unenrolled. And that's actually a good thing. But I think that they don't feel that the system is fair. They feel that the money makes it impossible to have candidates that represent their views. They feel that the system has stopped working for them completely. So I would even go further. Yes, same-day voting, but we also have to look at alternate systems such as instant runoff voting, such as proportional representation. These are systems that work to represent all of us.
Thank you. And moving on to question 7, another long one. The Better Government Association, as Mr. Darkangelo referred to before, and National Freedom of Information Coalition have given Massachusetts a grade of F for transparency of public records. Do you believe that grade is justified? And if you were Secretary of State, how would you improve government transparency and responsiveness?
So just to give an example, there was a request within the last few months in regard to a court case that was decided during the 1950s, and the Secretary's office did not want to release the records because of confidentiality. I respect the concept of confidentiality as well, but I respect transparency more. People are supposed to feel like they own their government, and they don't feel like that anymore. And it's because the government is telling them, no, you don't have the right to do this, and you don't have the right to do that. People are capable of tremendous things. We believe in the Green Rainbow Party that every single person deserves dignity, respect, and love. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody. I mean regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of age, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of gender identity, regardless of whether you have a mental or physical disability, regardless of whether you're a documented immigrant or an undocumented immigrant, and regardless of whether you're a prisoner or free. Every single person matters. And the message that people are getting from their government right now is that they don't. People are supposed to own the government. They are supposed to have a right to public information, no matter how embarrassing it is, no matter how much somebody thinks, well, that doesn't have anything to do with you. So as secretary, I pledge to have an open government that includes everyone.
Thank you. Mr. D'Arcangelo.
So the viewers at home need to make a decision. Do you want more of the same? If you want more of the same, vote for Bill Galvin. And you're going to get an F from Freedom of Information Coalition. And you're going to get an F from the Better Government Bureau, the Reporters Committee. And you're going to get cited by the Justice Department for not reporting military ballots. Or you're going to vote for me. And you're going to vote for my positive reform agenda. That's all about new ideas and new energy, transparency and modernization. If you really believe that we are a government of the people, by the people, for the people, then you have to vote for me. There may be progressive Democrats watching this. You're going to vote for a Republican this time because I believe in transparency. I've been stonewalled for 180 days, my public records request, asking him how much taxpayer money he used on these self-promotional PSAs. There's no reason to keep those documents private. Absolutely none at all. I'm going to open it up. He's had 20 years. He's kept it closed. You decide.
Thank you very much. Question 8. Do you believe the Secretary of State has been an effective advocate on behalf of residents filing investor complaints? Please give us specific examples to justify your answer.
Yeah, this is another place where he's fallen down, really. And all he's done, if you have a 401k, if you have a pension plan, all he's done is diminish your returns. By dragging Fidelity into court, by dragging all of the major organizations into court, usually over frivolous things. And what he does is he goes after the low-hanging fruit, like this Teleflex Ponzi scheme. Yeah, great. You uncovered that. But you know what? That was very apparent and very easy. What's happened up there is he's set up all these fiefdoms and there's all this hierarchy within the Securities and Exchange Division, and particularly within RICE, which is the Enforcement Division. And all he's done is really bring people into court, which, by the way, they changed the law. His number one contributors used to come from that industry. And then what happened? He found out that he might have an election. So lo and behold, what do? They changed the way that now they can't accept donations from those types of people. If you look at his donations over the years and the contributors, the people who have contributed to him, it's a who's who of that industry. And then he changed it. So now it's impossible for competitors to try to access any of those people. So it's outrageous. It's more of the same old from him, where he wants the headlines. That's all he wants to do is grab headlines, but he doesn't really want to do the tough work. He doesn't want to roll up his sleeves. He's got a deplorable record in this area, unfortunately, just like most of the other areas in his office. If you want more of the same, vote for him. If you want a Beacon Hill that's hiding records and stonewalling records and getting F grades and not reporting military ballots, vote for him. If you want a new positive reform agenda, a progressive agenda that's going to open up our government, that's going to modernize our government, then vote for me. You can find out more at davin2014.com. But unfortunately, he hasn't done a good job in this area, and many of the people working in that office have conflicts of interest where they're both attorneys that represent people in front of the board, and yet they advise the board. It's awful.
Thanks. 1 minute.
Well, if you're gonna, it's easy to say that you're gonna investigate fraud, but there are many types of fraud. There's fraud that businesses do, but there's also fraud that the government does when it's more concerned about their own sustenance in power, as opposed to representing the will of the people. Let's take patronage, for example. That's something that we really haven't heard about much in the campaign, even though it's all over the news. We need a new hiring code. it's reprehensible that people should be hiring their friends and that we don't have even records of this going on. I would propose that in the Secretary's office, and I think it should be state law as well, that any referral that is made as far as job hiring be done in writing. And if you violate that, it should be a criminal offense, because giving somebody a job when they don't deserve it is just as bad as taking a bribe.
All right, thank you very much. And moving on to question 9. If elected, what areas of improvement would you pursue for the office of Secretary of State, and what would your priorities be?
Well, I think the Secretary has to have a much broader vision. When we're talking about heading the corporations division, we shouldn't just be talking about being friends with them. We should be talking about engaging in real regulation. I think that we have to take a step back and think about what sort of community do we want to have. Are we concerned about climate change? Are we concerned about our children and what the fossil fuel problem is going to do if we keep using up our precious resources? That's something that has to be taken into account when we think about chartering corporations. Do we want a corporation to just be an animal that serves itself, or should there be a standard that a corporation should have to do something for the public good? This is not a unique, original idea. If you go back in time in Massachusetts, it used to be just to have a corporate charter, you had to show that you were going to provide some sort of service, something that was healthy for your community. So we have to take a step back and say, if we just have a corporations division that just rubber stamps and just becomes friends with every corporation, how is that serving the people? So that's what I would propose, that we have to look at new ways of looking at the corporations division.
Thanks very much. Your turn, Mr. Darkin.
Thank you. Yes, I've offered a detailed 11-point agenda, reform agenda. Many of the good government groups line up with it and are positive on it. I've answered all the questions. You can go to my website, davin2014.com, to find out more. So I'm the one with ideas in this race. I've been offering ideas from day one and putting up red flags about all of the issues over public records disclosure that the Secretary has been cited on, and all those disappointments that we've already gone over. So I'm the one with the ideas. And the Secretary, he's been doing nothing but attack me really from day one, because he knows he doesn't want to talk about his record. Because we really haven't even talked about the elephant in the room here. Where is the Secretary? He's turned down this debate. He turned down Arlington Access. He turned down ACM and Jim Browdy. He turned down the Lowell Sun. He turned down Fisher College. He doesn't want to appear because he doesn't want to talk about his failed record. Well, I want to talk about my positive reform agenda. Go to davin2014.com and you can find out more.
Thank you. And we're down to the last question in this round, at least. What experience do you have that makes you qualified to serve in this role?
Sure. You could make an argument that I have more experience than the Secretary does, because I've actually worked in the private sector and in the public sector. I'm a 2-time elected city councilor at large in Malden. I've served 3 governors. I've worked in the governor's office. I've worked in the state senate, so I understand Beacon Hill very well, but I'm not a creature of Beacon Hill. I haven't been there 42 years like Bill Galvin. So I have great experience on Beacon Hill, but I also have experience in the private sector and in the nonprofit world as well. So I'll be able to use all of that and bring a Secretary of State's office to you that has balance. That's the other part of this. All of our constitutional officers are Democrats. It's time to elect a Republican in there and get some balance. The other thing, go through the divisions. Corporations division. Well, I've worked for corporations. I understand corporate structure very well. I understand business very well. I've been successful in the private sector. I'm a small business owner myself, member of the Chamber of Commerce, member of the Public Relations Society of America. So I have that experience. With elections, I'm an election officer for the city of Boston, something the Secretary cannot say he's ever done. So I understand elections very well. All of the other offices in the Secretary of State's office, I have just as good, if not better, qualifications than the Secretary of State currently. If we looked at each of our resumes side by side and we could have all the voters just vote on that, I am confident I would get your vote and I would win this election. The challenge is because the Secretary has used his incumbency over the past 20 years to build his campaign war chest and really keep doing the same old, nothing to see here, typical Beacon Hill routine. Well, guess what? He's been up at the State House for 42 years. It's time for a change. If you want new energy, new vision, and new ideas, I'm asking for your vote. I'm running to be the first person with a disability to ever be on a statewide ballot and to ever achieve statewide office. I'm asking for your vote.
Thanks very much. And Mr. Factor, your experience for the office.
Well, I want to brag about the fact that I don't have corporate experience and say that I've been a lifelong activist from the cradle. To tell you a little bit about myself, I grew up in New York City in the South Bronx, which was a very mixed neighborhood. We learned to be activists because there was a war, because there was poverty, and we learned about the value of community. I moved to Massachusetts in the 1990s, where I became a public interest lawyer. I do most of my work defending victims of domestic violence or people who've hit hard times and need help. That's the type of officer we need in this state. No more of the same old. We need people who understand community, who understand real people, and I would be honored to be your secretary. Thank you.
Thank you both very much, and we're going to move on to the next round. In this case, I will remind you, we will begin with you asking a question of your opponent, and you will have 2 minutes to answer and then a 1-minute rebuttal from the person who asked the question. So please begin.
Dave, I know we've talked before about the issue of lobbying in the state. Do you have some proposals that would create a fairer system with the problem that we have right now?
I do. And right now, the system that we have is crazy. They've set it up, the Secretary has set it up so that on Beacon Hill, even if you walk by a lobbyist, you're supposed to report that. That's crazy. Let's go to the heart of the matter, and that's the money in politics here. Let's try to make money a secondary type of thing, not the main thing. So just because you want to buy the biggest lobbyist and you want to try to get something passed or whatever, look at the ballot questions for an example, the money being spent on those. So in terms of lobbying, I think we can have much more open disclosure with less onerous rules. They've made so many rules now, it's so onerous that it doesn't promote disclosure. Disclosure should be the key to transparency, which is my platform, as you know, Danny. Transparency and modernization. We can also modernize it as well. Let's have an app for a lobbyist and for people on the other side that they can instantly check in rather than having to file all the paperwork that they do now and having to check. Like if you and I wanted to just go check on a lobbyist right now, we got to schlep all the way up to Ashburton Place and physically go look through paperwork. That's crazy. All that information should be online, accessible via your smartphone. It's easily done. Again, he's had 20 years to implement that. He hasn't gotten it done. And there's no indication that he wants to even get it done. He wants more of the same old, drag your feet, nothing to see here. Let's keep getting Fs in transparency. Let's keep not reporting on military ballots. It's time for a change.
Mr. Factor, rebuttal.
Well, what I would say is that we do both agree is that there's a problem with lobbyists having too much influence. But I would say, Dave, that we have to go further. I think that if you're a lobbyist for a for-profit corporation and you've had your influence on Beacon Hill, you've had your shot. That's it. You can't, dig twice in both pails. You can't have that influence and also then be able to make large contributions to campaigns. So I support the Green Rainbow Party rule, which says that if you're a lobbyist for a for-profit corporation, we don't want your money. If you are someone who is an officer, a president or a vice president of a corporation that already lobbies the government, you've had your influence. Let's have campaigns financed by actual average people.
Thank you very much. Your turn to ask a question.
Thank you. So my question to you, Danny, would be, what's your reaction to the fact that I filed a public records request 180 days ago asking the Secretary for disclosure on how we spent taxpayer money on self-promotional public service announcements?
Yeah, it's really terrible, and you know, in this way, Dave did a good thing because he used himself as an example to try to shed light on a problem. If we don't have public information, then we're not able to accomplish our goals. You know, we have a problem where people are hurting in this state because of poverty, for example. We have statistics that are showing that there may be more than 30% of children who are either hungry or near hunger right now. We need information from our government to be able to help people who are working on solving problems like this. That's not possible if you have a government that is basically set on using its own agenda to decide which records it reveals and which records it doesn't. So what I would say is that we have to have the most open public records policy possible.
Any rebuttal?
I think the answer to many of these challenges are openness and freedom. At the end of the day, if we don't have freedom in government, then what do we have? Why do we even have a government? We need freedom and due process, and the Secretary just has not gotten it done. He's had 180 days to be able to produce these records. He hasn't done it, and he doesn't want to do it. And I don't know what's worse. When he sent me the letter back saying, Dave, I don't even know if these documents exist, or the fact that he's trying to stonewall me for 180 days, or the fact that why doesn't he know where these documents are? He's been in these public service announcements over 180 days, and he's trying to charge me $5,300 for records that are already available. That's crazy, and that will change under my tenure. I will open up these documents, make them transparent, and modernize our system so that they can be a click of a mouse away.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Factor, your opportunity to ask one more question.
Dave, as you know, our country had an economic collapse in 2008, including our state of Massachusetts. Bill Galvin is in charge of the Securities Division. What do you think he could have done better?
Well, he could have done something. The reality is, Danny, he did nothing, and he's done nothing. And for 20 years, all he's done is increase regulations, increase fees, and really made it more difficult to do business here in Massachusetts. We're one of the toughest places in the nation to do business. Some of the highest costs of living around here. And that's due in large part to the onerous regulations and fees that we keep charging. So whether it's the Securities and Exchange Division, whether it's the Corporations Division, or whether it's keeping records open and public, the Secretary of State has just not gotten it done. And what does he do instead? He takes money, taxpayer money, on self-promotional PSAs to let everybody know how great he thinks he is and how great it sees he's doing. As soon as people scratch beneath the surface, they're not voting for him. They're voting for me or you, Danny. And I think that my platform of transparency and modernization beats his record of hiding documents and keeping things the same old way and just, keeping forms in paper. Right? Paper forms in 2014. Like right now, if you want to register your business in Massachusetts, you can't even do it online. Yeah, sure, there's a form that they give you online, but you know what the bureaucrats do on the other end? All they end up doing is printing that form out, walking it down a cube so that another bureaucrat can manually enter that into a database. That's not e-commerce. I will make a website that interacts with people, that's on your smartphone, that you can do business with from day one to avoid any future collapses and to keep business moving here in the Commonwealth. That's what we need, a Secretary of State that's transparent and modern. That's what I'm going to be. The current Secretary has not gotten it done.
So what I can say is that we had an economic collapse that was a result of corporations and government colluding and not looking out for average people. Bill Galvin should have done something about it. He should have spoke out. He should have called for reform, once he saw, what happened, that the securities firms were in the pockets of the politicians. What was the result? The result is that instead of being in favor of some sort of program to end poverty, and poverty was created by people, it can be ended by people. He supports programs like Deval Patrick's Billions for Biotech program, which gives $1 billion to biotech people. The Green Rainbow Party candidates have a different idea to what to do with $1 billion. How about giving it back to our local communities so we can house people who need housing and feed people who are hungry? That's what the Green Rainbow Party believes.
Thank you very much. And believe it or not, we're down to our last question, and it's for you to ask, Mr. Darkangelo.
Thank you very much, James. So, Danny, I would ask you, we've been campaigning since January. If you had to give me one reason to vote for me, what would it be?
Well, what I would say is that we should not be voting for Bill Galvin, and that's the reason to vote for either of us. What the public may not know is that Dave and I met because we were both frustrated with the idea that Bill Galvin was not willing to debate us. We wrote a joint letter to Bill Galvin together, and we explained that democracy means a free and fair exchange of ideas. We sent that letter by certified mail, both to his office, to his home, and to his campaign headquarters. The one from the campaign headquarters did come back signed, so we know that he received it. Now, why is debate important in the first place? I believe that if you're in office for 4 years, let alone 8 or 12 or 16 or 20, don't you owe it to the people to be able to defend your record? Wouldn't you want to defend your record if you were proud of what you did? So what sort of message does it send that Bill Galvin is not only not here today, but hasn't appeared at the dozen or so forums that we've been invited to all over the state? While I say vote for Danny Factor, vote for the Green Rainbow Party, don't vote for Bill Galvin. He's part of the system. Vote for alternatives, whatever your belief is.
Thank you. And do you have a rebuttal?
Yeah, thank you. As a rebuttal, I would say, Danny, the reason you'd vote for me is because I stand for modernization and transparency and new ideas, a new, fresh way of doing things. I haven't been on Beacon Hill for 42 years like Bill Galvin has. But yet I have the experience of knowing what Beacon Hill is like from my experience in the governor's office, in the state senate, and my experience as city councilor at large in Malden. So I have that experience. I kind of have the best of both worlds there. So you'd vote for me because I want to open it up. Let's make things more transparent. I want to modernize. Let's use the force multiplier of technology to make our lives better for the people of the Commonwealth. And really, I'm trying to model for people with disabilities that they can run for statewide office and hopefully win statewide office. I may be the first person with a disability ever to reach a statewide ballot. So the fact that the secretary doesn't want to debate me, I really take that as he doesn't think much of people with disabilities. So it's disappointing. But again, vote for me, Dave, in 2014. I appreciate being with you, Danny.
I do too.
And we all appreciate you both being here, and we're going to move right now into closing statements, and you will begin, Mr. Darkangelo.
Sure. James, thank you, and thank you, Arlington, for this opportunity to be with you today. It's David Darkangelo. I'm running for Secretary of State. I'm a two-time elected Malden City Councilor at large. I've served 3 governors. I've worked in the state legislature. I understand Beacon Hill very well, but I'm not a creature of Beacon Hill. I've also worked in the private sector and for nonprofits, and I understand government very well and the private sector very well. So I want to be able to bring both of those together and increase transparency and modernize our Secretary of State's office. 2 things we desperately need after 20 years of the same rule up there. The guy I'm running against, he's been there for 42 years on Beacon Hill. It's time for a change. You can go to Dave in 2014 to find out more. But I have an 11-point positive reform agenda with ideas that will really help our Commonwealth and help you for this important office. I'm in government to try to improve the human condition. I'm asking for your vote on November 4th. Thank you for being with me. It's David Darkangelo for Secretary of State.
Thank you. Mr. Factor.
Well, voters, you have a choice to make on November 4th. You can either vote for the same old, you can vote for the Democrats or the Republicans, or you can do something new. You can go outside the system and vote for a Green Rainbow Party candidate like myself, that is willing to put his foot down to end corporate greed, that is willing to speak out for free and fair elections that includes everyone, that talks about the issues that the other candidates aren't talking about, like the fact that we can end poverty, that we need an economic bill of rights to guarantee people the right of healthy food, clean water, decent single-payer health care, the right of everyone to have basic shelter, and the right to live in a free and fair environment. Vote for Danny Factor. That's electfactor.org, electfactor.org. Thank you very much, and thank you to the town of Arlington for inviting us.
And thank you. And we do want to thank both candidates for being here for the debate today. David D'Arcangelo, Republican candidate for Secretary of State, and Danny Factor, candidate from the Green Rainbow Party for the same office. We want to remind you, as the candidates have, that making your own voice count is essential, and that will happen on November 4th, 2 weeks from today, in fact. So thanks again for joining us. For Arlington Public News, I'm James Milan. We'll see you later.